A couple years ago, I made a video about the Alien Universe timeline in anticipation for Alien Romulus and Alien Earth being released. Romulus has since come out and was a big hit with everyone except for that weird Ian Holm deepfake nonsense they threw in there. And Alien Earth is now loose in the world and has confirmed my long-standing theory that Ray Romano exists in the official canon of Alien lore. Might seem weird, but if you were looking, the signs were everywhere. And recently, I was reading through the comments of that timeline video like an absolute psychopath. I came across a lot of gripes and straight up hate for the films that aren't Alien or aliens with a $sign. Most of that hate directed at Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, which I get why people don't enjoy Alien Resurrection. It was way too French for the standard American at the time it came out. I get that.
Who are you expecting, Santa Claus?
It probably didn't help that the director of that movie didn't speak English either. But as someone who came to the Alien franchise years after its initial releases, I want to know why there was so much venom for Alien 3, a pretty good movie that's been disowned by its director, disliked by the fans, and was butchered by the studio. The very same film that was originally supposed to bring xenomorphs to Earth more than 30 years ago.
On Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
Welcome to Film Gone Wrong, a show about movies that should have been big but something went wrong along the way. With Alien Earth splattering across our TV screens at the time of this recording, I wanted to dig deeper into Alien Cubed, the Alien movie that was supposed to drop xenomorphs onto the shores of America. Kinda. I'll also be diving into the drama behind the scenes of the movie, the many mutations the film went through before it hit theaters, and what exactly went wrong. The answer is a lot. Our sources for today's video are the two versions of Alien 3, the theatrical cut and the assembly cut, which we'll talk about a little bit later, some interviews with the cast and crew of the film, including David Fincher himself, and the extensive 3-hour documentary Wreckage and Rage by director Charles D. Lauzirika. For clarity, this video is not going to be a recap of Alien 3, I did that in the timeline video if you want to check it out. But I will be talking about the plot of the film and the plight of its characters, so if you haven't seen Alien 3 and you're watching this video for some reason, here's your spoiler warning. I feel like Alien 3 is such a great film to dissect, and not just because the production was a complete and utter nightmare for everyone involved, which might explain why it's also the darkest film in the Alien series, which is an impressive feat considering it's a film franchise that's about space truckers and scientists getting turned into splatter art. Our story starts all the way back in the late 80s. Following the massive success of James Cameron's Aliens, 20th Century Fox wanted another sequel quick, fast, and in a hurry to keep the gravy train rolling. Brandywine, the production company behind every Alien film up through Covenant, were less excited about the idea of a follow-up.
Everybody wanted to make the sequel to Alien, kind of except us.
Thinking that the Alien well was dried up by this point, especially following the high note that Aliens went out on.
Because we thought, what do you do with this one to make it different? The whole idea you can't do something that's just going to be a reheat of 1 or 2.
Fox and Brandywine decided that the focus of the third film would be on Weyland-Yutani and why they're so obsessed with turning xenomorphs into weapons. They also made the terrible mistake of giving themselves a self-imposed release year of 1992, even though there was no script. And there wouldn't be, but we'll get to that.
Shortly after writing the story for Alien 3, within a month, the owner of the studio had given us a release date.
The studio's treatment morphed over time and eventually became about Weyland-Yutani getting into a standoff against a society of militaristic space socialists who have left Earth. It's kind of like that joke from Command & Conquer 3.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Well, that didn't last long. The movie was also going to focus on Dwayne Cutie Pie Hicks as the main character of the film, with Ripley making a small appearance somewhere in there and then returning in full force for the fourth film, which was being planned in tandem with Alien 3.
We're trying to put Alien 3 together now. We've actually got the story mapped out for parts 3 and 4, which would conclude the series. That's the plan.
Fox wasn't super keen on the idea, but they did push for Brandywine to shoot both films back to back, which obviously didn't happen, and to get Ridley Scott back in the director's chair for the third film, which also obviously didn't happen. At this time, Ridley was probably busy directing Black Rain, a pretty cool movie that asked the question, is Andy Garcia good at karaoke?
Baby, it's alright now! Baby, it's alright now! Shake that thing!
With Ridley Scott out of the picture, Fox then turned to director Renny Harlin, who was just coming off of Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Harlan, like Giler and Hill, also wanted to break away from the feeling of the first two films and do something totally different. One of Harlan's initial ideas was to have Xenomorphs land on Earth.
Other concepts that were floating around in those days, also the idea of the aliens coming to Earth.
The first writer to take a crack at an Alien 3 script was William Gibson, who you might know as the author of Neuromancer. Gibson summed up his script as space commies hijack alien eggs, and included a section of the script where the Sulaco arrives at a space station that's a huge shopping mall named Anchor Point. It's a pretty decent script which you can track down online, and also Dark Horse Comics adapted it into a 5-issue comic series, which I highly recommend if you're able to track down a copy of the book. Production delays led to Gibson eventually leaving the film altogether and leaving his script behind.
But what we got was a perfectly executed script that wasn't all that interesting.
Fox then pivoted to Near Dark screenwriter Eric Red, who had a straight-up horrible time with the whole experience.
That's the one script I completely disown because it was not my script. It was the rushed product of too many story conferences and interference with no time to write, and it turned out utter crap.
Red's script was completely different from what the studio and Brandywine had laid out in their initial treatment. There is no more shopping mall planet, no more space Soviets. Instead, Red added a whole new cast of characters and introduced new breeds of xenomorph as well. Red's film would have opened with a team of Marines boarding the Sulaco and finding that all the survivors from Aliens had been killed by a xenomorph that was stashed away on the ship, which isn't too far off from what happened in the final film. Red's script eventually lands at a floating biodome named North Star, which resembles kind of a Norman Rockwell-esque small town but on a space station. The Earth that the aliens were supposed to go to. It would have ended with a huge battle between the townspeople on North Star and a horde of xenomorphs, but Red was fired from the film for deviating so wildly from what the original pitch was, and the plan to film 2 movies back-to-back was dissolved entirely. David Towie of Riddick fame was next up in the batter's box, who changed the shopping mall planet to a prison planet, where Weyland-Yutani is performing experiments on xenomorphs to turn them into weapons. The prison planet idea would also stick around in the final film. Rennie Harlan, however, would not stick around. Frustrated with the constant production delays and their rewriting of the script, Harlan left the film to go direct Die Hard 2, and years later he would eventually fumble Gina Davis. You blew it. My personal favorite script of all of them came from New Zealand filmmaker Vincent Ward, who was selected by Walter Hill after he saw Ward's film The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey. Weird movie. Ward was an interesting choice for directing the 3rd film of this franchise given his resume at the time and then also years after. Vincent Ward's script focused on Ripley's pod from the Sulaco being ejected and crash landing on a moon-sized space station, which is inhabited by an order of monks who rejected technology on Earth and made themselves a floating wooden planet complete with wheat fields, painted skies, huge cathedrals, massive libraries, and a bunch of bald dudes. Unfortunately for everyone, a xenomorph tagged along with Ripley and starts wreaking havoc throughout the floating monastery.
There's groups of these guys trying to kill this thing, and again, all they have are very simple implements, farming implements.
Fox initially liked the idea, probably because they had been through 3 different scripts from 3 different writers by this point. Some people were not in love with it, like Fox executive John Landau, who called Vincent Ward's idea
more on the artsy-fartsy side.
Farts aside, if they did go with the Vincent Ward script, it would have been a wildly different and interesting addition to the franchise. Going from spending the first 2 movies within the world of Weyland-Yutani with their derelict mining ships and shake-and-bake colonies, to then jumping to space monks in a mahogany maze is a crazy swing that could have shifted so much of the Alien films going forward. At least until Ridley did that himself with Prometheus and Covenant. Fox wanted to transform some of Ward's ideas, like instead of a planet made of wood filled with monks, it would be a refinery populated by prisoners similar to David Towie's screenplay, which explains why the sets that were being built by legendary set designer Norman Reynolds more resembled factories than churches before the script was even finished. Completely unrelated, but does anyone else think that Norman Reynolds looks like Count Chocula if he was a human? Anyway, Vincent Ward responded to this list of demands from the studio by walking off the project. It also didn't help that he learned that the assistant that Fox assigned to him was reporting to the studio behind his back.
She's phoning in every night to the studio. And your production designer gets phone calls every night from the studio behind your back.
Ward was out as director, but his script wasn't tossed in the flaming dumpster that this production was becoming. Walter Hill and David Giler took over control of writing the movie before hitting a wall, and then hiring script doctor Larry Ferguson to do some surgery, which Sigourney Weaver was not a fan of. Following Aliens, Sigourney, who had a lot of power with this franchise at the time, had a clause in her contract that the only person who was allowed to write the final script besides Hill and Giler was James Cameron. So, With no final script, no director, $7 million already spent on sets being built in London, and a self-imposed release date of 1992, Fox moved ahead with the movie and tapped a little music video director by the name of David Fincher to take over for Vincent Ward. It's pretty obvious that the heads at Fox and Brandywine went with Fincher because he was a 27-year-old who had never directed a feature film before. And I'm sure they were probably impressed with his music video work, which is phenomenal, but they also wanted a director that they could essentially push around and get the movie finished.
He's a great shooter. That was the word that constantly was being said to me, and that the management of the story would be not really his responsibility.
The big thing the studio didn't account for, and I say this as a fan of his work, is that David Fincher was and is an extremely demanding and particular director who doesn't care what anyone else thinks, even the people who hire him.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
There's a moment in the documentary where Fincher just big dogs executive producer Ezra Swerdlow in front of cameras and a whole bunch of the crew. It's f***ing wild.
I don't know if I got buried or not. I don't know what really happened.
Okay, Ezra?
Gotcha.
We're cool on the concept now. We're all hip to this. You saw it right here.
Principal photography began in January of 1991, and aside from Fincher and the studio constantly butting heads, there was one giant roadblock after another. Filming at Pinewood, where they also shot Aliens, happened during one of the coldest winters that England had endured in a number of years. The script was going through constant changes, and with a 1992 release window locked in, production had to move quickly, which if you know anything about David Fincher's directing style, he doesn't.
We shot 99 takes of 4 setups or 5 setups in that.
People I've never even met complain about how many takes they shoot.
And that wasn't any different on Alien 3.
We were doing a lot of takes. We'd do like 12 or 15 takes quite often.
The problems didn't stop there. Fincher also lost his director of photography 6 weeks into production. Jordan Cronenweth, who was the cinematographer on Blade Runner, Stop Making Sense, Altered States, and Madonna's Oh Father music video, which David Fincher directed, sadly had to leave the film due to Parkinson's disease. He was replaced with another legendary British DP, Alex Thompson, one of my favorites, whose work is nothing to shake your head at.
Nothing, tra-la-la.
It seems the main thing which kept Fincher employed on this film, despite his constant battles with the studio, was 2 things. It would have cost too much time and too much money to replace him with a yes man, obviously. Also the fact that every cast member, especially Sigourney, loved working with Fincher.
David Fincher is a genius, basically, for whom I would jump off London Bridge. I trust him implicitly.
There weren't just problems on the directing and scripting and producing side either. The special effects team was having their own struggles. Stan Winston, who was the master behind the creature effects on Cameron's Aliens, was unavailable due to splitting time between Terminator 2 and Batman Returns. Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis, who had worked under Winston, recently had started their own studio, Amalgamated Dynamics. They got put in the driver's seat and were tasked with creating a new breed of Xenomorph. According to Swiss artist and fairy tale villain H.R. Giger, Fincher wanted a more animalistic interpretation of the alien for this film due to the fact that it gestates inside of a dog, or an ox, depending on which version of the film you're watching. We'll get to that.
In his mind was a kind of puma or a beast like that was difficult.
Love the way he says puma.
Puma.
This added an extra wrinkle since they had to figure out a way for the Xenomorph to move on all 4s. Stop motion animation was thrown out in favor of using a rod puppet, which looks good in some shots and not so much in others. That's probably because Richard Edlund and his team at Boss Films had to invent the technology to achieve the effects you see in the movie, and under a tremendous time constraint.
So this was all equipment that had to be designed, built, foolproof, and perfect, because the responsibility was on us.
By 1991 standards, it's not too terrible, all things considered, honestly. There's also the infamous dog costume, which even if you've never seen Alien 3, you've probably seen the footage of a Whippet trotting around corridors dressed as a Xenomorph.
It was so silly looking. I mean, it was the dailies were like you were on the floor because they were so stupid looking.
Speaking of animals, for the scenes of the Xenomorph bursting out of an ox carcass, the effects team had real animal organs brought in from butcher shops.
We were dressing all this stuff with real guts that would come, daily. The smell of this place was just so overpowering.
The post-process on the film wasn't any easier. Editor Terry Rawlings was brought in to try and patch together the haphazard collection of shots and half-written plot threads into something resembling a movie. Again, cannot stress enough, there was no script for Alien 3 during production, which is insane.
We went through this production continually reworking the script. The movie got greenlit based on a whole different version of the script.
Terry approached the studio with a list of shots that he considered necessary to be able to make the film somewhat coherent.
David and I said, well, what we needed, say, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then they would say, fine, we've now decided you can do A, E, and F.
They ignored most of those. Also, an entirely new ending for the film had to be reshot as well. The studio felt like Ripley falling into a furnace was too close to the ending of Terminator 2, which meant bringing Sigourney back. And to avoid paying her $40,000 to shave her head again, the world's best bald cap was invented.
In itself, the most difficult makeup I've ever done in my life. To everyone's amazement, it worked.
Through gritted teeth and a year of post-production, Alien 3 miraculously made its 1992 deadline, opening number 2 at the box office behind Lethal Weapon 3. Nobody could compete with the power of Pesci at this time.
First they drug you, then they f*** you. And when they're done f***ing you, along comes the insurance company and f***s you some more.
And while the movie was a financial success, the highest grossing Alien film until Prometheus, it wasn't received warmly by audiences, critics, or James Cameron.
David Fincher did a really good job, I thought, photographically and so on. I mean, I think it's really a well-made film visually. It's kind of a slap in the face of the fans who invested in, Newt and Hicks and all of those character relationships. And I understand the instinct, of course, which is you have to make it your own. I just don't think you should make it your own at the expense of what people like, personally, but.
It even got the infamous 2 thumbs down from Siskel and Ebert, who was onto something with his review of the film.
Alien 3, the third and least exciting, but in some ways the most interesting movie about that plague of spider-like monsters from outer space.
Ebert was right. If there's anything nice to be said about Alien 3, especially at that time, it was the most interesting turn of the franchise at that point, and is definitely the biggest deviation of the franchise. I say this as a big fan of this franchise, but the majority of the Alien movies all kind of share similar DNA for the most part. They're movies about groups of people on spaceships and foreign planets being hunted by xenomorphs because for one reason or another they stuck their nose into a hive full of danger eggs. Either that or you fell for an obvious trap if you're the crew in Covenant, but don't get me started on Covenant.
Because you can't be a person of faith and be counted on to make qualified, rational decisions.
Perfectly same, I assure you.
But that's why I think Alien 3 is special. It subverts that. Ripley is dropped onto a desolate planet after losing her newfound family, and introduces a big pain in the ass and face and torso to a prison full of lice-infested character actors. And unlike the other films where Ripley or the other protagonists rise to the moment, take charge, and shoot an alien out of the damn airlock, in this film Ripley's just done. She's been through this nightmare twice before, and instead of putting on the hero cap like she normally does, she just wants to die.
I'm telling you, I want to die!
We got a deal! A big thanks to the queen alien that's lurking inside of her chest. And everyone else has to just try and fight this thing with axes and jumper cables, mainly because Sigourney Weaver worked in a no-gun clause into her contract after not loving the amount of gun violence that was in Aliens.
It's actually hard for me morally to justify being in a film with so many guns. I don't like that feeling you get after you've shot off a few rounds of, I'm immortal, it's just garbage.
Alien 3's biggest problem, aside from not actually having a script, is that it's a bummer, especially following the high note that Aliens ends on with Newt, Hicks, Bishop, and Ripley surviving the impossible. Following something like that with a misery parade where everyone's just dead, it's a hard sell, and audiences were not happy with what they were sold.
I'd rather be nothing.
Now, when it comes to critiquing a movie, you really can only go off of what is up on the screen in the final cut, which for Alien 3 is a complete mess, especially the theatrical cut.
American audiences, looking at these bunch of bald guys, they couldn't tell one from the next. That was a constant complaint. They all had English accents, which drove them all crazy.
For the home release, Fox wanted to do a director's cut of the film, but since David Fincher wanted absolutely nothing to do with the movie after he was done, the assembly cut was compiled together out of post-production notes, mostly Fincher's, and was added to the Alien quadrilogy, a word we use all the time and is totally real. But it is one of those movies where you can see how good it could have been, and between both versions of the film, that's pretty clear. It's a shame what was tossed out. The truly stunning opening of the assembly cut gives us a look at how horrible and desolate the planet of Fiorina 161 is. Look at that. It's so gorgeous and stark and just filmed spectacularly, and it makes the audience immediately connect with Charles Dance's character as someone with compassion and care for Ripley.
Talk to me. Come on. Come on.
A lot of the Charles Dance performance, which is fantastic, sadly is missing from the theatrical cut, along with Gollick's entire story.
I've had friends say, in fact, we saw you in one scene and then you kind of disappear. You know, nobody knows quite where you disappear to.
Played by former Dr. Whomst Paul McGann, Gollick is a prisoner on Fury who becomes obsessed with the Xenomorph. He sees it as some kind of deity to be worshipped, which leads to Gollick killing fellow inmates and setting the alien free after Ripley and company manage to trap it.
And he's meant to release this monster, team up with the thing, and go and kill Ripley. Fantastic! I'll take the part.
So much time spent with characters like Dylan, Clemens, and Aaron is ditched in the theatrical cut, which feels so misguided after coming off of Aliens, a movie that had a cast of characters that were given time on screen for audiences to connect with.
Not bad for a human.
I'm throwing a little bit of shade at Giler and Hill on this front, but the assembly cut is easily the better version of the film, mainly because it's closer to the movie that Fincher was trying to make in the first place. It really cements that his ideas, for the most part, were the right call.
I think it was a great film that got lost. I think that and when it came out, it didn't have what it should have had in it, which was a shame.
Fincher's even responsible for what might be the image that most people associate with the Alien franchise, which he's still not happy with.
The one shot that Fox was happy to put in the trailer, the Alien's filing cabinet drawer opening on Sigourney Weaver's face. I always knew we wanted to do it, and it never looked the way I wanted it to. I wanted to light all behind her. It should have been two shapes in silhouette. We should have had more coverage of it, and we didn't, mostly because we were spending all our f***ing time trying to shoot plates for the rod puppet side of the thing. I think we had an hour and a half to get that, but it's powerful because it's a powerful idea.
There's a lot of ways to unpack that powerful idea quote from Fincher. Is it a reflection on the themes of sexual assault that were so intertwined with the visuals and story of the first film, especially with Ripley now existing in this violent world completely dominated by men? Is Ripley a stand-in for Fincher feeling up against a wall with a blood-hungry monster at his throat at all times? Is it just cool as f***? It is cool as f***. We'll never really get a full answer, probably, because that quote is the first and most likely last time David Fincher has commented on Alien 3 in over 20 years. So on that note, is Alien 3 bad? Not entirely. The assembly cut definitely has more juice in it for sure, but that's also thanks to the additional 30 minutes put back in. It's obviously not stellar. I'm not going to be ridiculous and act like it's some misunderstood masterpiece that everyone is sleeping on, like Alien Resurrection is.
Santa Claus!
But I think it should be commended for even existing at all. Granted, a lot of the wounds were self-inflicted by the studio, but there is probably an alternate universe where Alien 3 exists and it is everything the studio wanted, and it is a middling to good film directed by some kind of journeyman director like John Turteltaub. Completely what Fox asked for, and greeted with a meh from audiences instead of a total dismissal at the time. Sorry to John Turteltaub for catching that stray there. I love the National Treasure movies. But the fact that there is even a masterfully shot and devastatingly sad deviation from the Alien franchise by the third entry, all seemingly driven by David Fincher's creativity and total contempt for the studio, is a feat in itself, I think. I don't know. Maybe learning how it all went wrong can help you appreciate these small moments of excellence in this movie. It's definitely not the worst third movie of a franchise. That goes to RoboCop 3. But tell me, what do you think? What's your favorite entry in the Alien franchise? What are your thoughts on Alien Earth? And is there a famous flop that you'd like a deeper dive into? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Hit all the good buttons that are down there, and make sure you keep it glued to Nerdist.com.